بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وآله الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين اللهم أخرجني من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمني بنور الفهم اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Alhamdulillah, we have tawfiq to continue our study of 40 hadith, and inshallah today we want to finish hadith 37. As you remember, we already mentioned 4 opinions about this hadith, and then Imam Khomeini has his own opinion as the 5th one. But before he mentions his opinion, he says that we need a prerequisite. We need to talk about the way scholars, especially mystics, have discussed names and qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes our consideration is about essence of God as such, means Zat min haythu hiya. So we are thinking about essence of God as such, and this is the most unknown to us. In this perspective, God is absolutely unknown, and there is no name for him in this consideration. And he says, دست آمال عرفا و آرزوی اصحاب قلوب و اولیا از آن کوتاه است. Mystics' dreams cannot reach here. The hand of their dreams means it's beyond their access. And also people of hearts, awliyaullah, they cannot dream of this point. Sometimes they call this anqay maghrib. Sometimes they call it the condition of ama, a kind of, situation that makes us blind. So this is one way of considering Allah in his essence, without considering anything else, any manifestation, anything, just his essence. This is too much for us. Then the next consideration is to consider his essence, but with the help of some essential names of God. Or you can say, although it is essence, but there is a way to understand something about that essence. For example, Ali, Azim. Allah is Ali, Allah is Azim. So they help us to understand something about his essence. He refers to a hadith in Al-Kafi which says the first name that God chose for himself was Al-Ali and Al-Azim. So the first names he chose for himself means the closest thing to his essence. Al-Ali, Al-Azim. So this is the second consideration, and they call it maqam ahadiyat. Ahad. Ahad is more than wahid. Wahid is the next one. Wahid means one. Ahad is something that is one and you cannot think of second. It has no part, no partner. Absolutely one. The third consideration is to consider essence of God insofar as it has names and qualities. They consider this wahidiyat, maqam wahidiyat, not ahadiyat. Ahadiyat was the previous one. Or they call it jam'ul jam'. The famous Isma A'zam that you must have heard a lot about it is about this consideration, this stage. Or Ismu Jami', the comprehensive name of God, is about this part. Then the fourth is to consider divine essence according to its manifestations in different realities. So this is when it is manifested in Faiz Muqaddas, holy phase. Phase means grace. Faiz Aqdas is again higher, it's about essence, but Faiz Muqaddas is about tajalliyat, manifestations. In this fourth one, they call it Zuhur Itlaqi. This is when God is appearing to us, is manifesting himself to us, and they call it also Maqam Uluhiyat. He is Allah, he is to be worshipped, he is Allah. Allah is also about this aspect. Allah is the one that is the name that although refers to his essence, but essence with all the qualities, all the things that we know about him. So this was the introduction. There was a muqaddimah prerequisite. So far, this is not something about Imam Khomeini. This is idea of ulama. Now he wants to use this and make his point. He says, before, of course, we go to the application that he has, he says also you must know that these are not some theoretical discussions only. These are things that mystics and people of heart and ma'rifah, with purification of their heart in their spiritual progress, in their spiritual journey, have reached. So they start with the last one, then the second to the last, and they go higher. He says, باید دانست که این اعتبارات که در لسان اهل معرفت و اصحاب قلوب است اخبار از نقشه تجلیات حق است بر قلوب صافیه آنها. It must be known that these considerations that are mentioned on the tongue of Ahl Ma'rifat and the people of heart, they inform us about the map of manifestations of Haqq, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on their pure heart. Safi means pure. So this is the way they have experienced. Arif doesn't use his mind. Arif uses his heart and shuhud. He has intuition and witnesses. If you remember, some of you who might have listened to the series Introduction to Islamic Mysticism based on Ayatollah Mutahhari's book, we have explained in the first maybe 2-3 sessions about the difference between Arif and Filsuf, mystic and philosopher. آن تجلیات به حسب مقامات و مراتب سلوک اولیاء و منازل و مراحل سیر سائرین الی الله از مقام ظهور اسما و صفاتی که مقام الوهیت می باشد و آن را الله نیز گویند الله نور السماوات و الارض شروع شود. So it starts from the position of Allah, which was the last one which mentioned. He's has uluhiyat, he's ma'luh, he's ma'bud, and goes further. So finally it reaches the names which are essential, like Ali or Azim, and there is Ism Musta'athar. Ism Musta'athar is a terminology that mystics use, and Imam Khomeini also many times in his books and works refers to this. There are discussions, what is Ism Musta'athar? It means a name which Allah, or maybe we can put it in this way, a name that he has kept it hidden, as if he has kept it for himself, is Musta'athar. It's hidden from us. So after this, he says, human beings, as long as they are using reasoning and mind, their journey is scientific. This is a scientific journey. But this is not the best, because knowledge can be hijab, is a veil, hijab akbar. But in the sense that we explained before, that when we say it's hijab akbar, means still knowledge is different from what is known. We have to try to understand what is known directly. Whether people who go through the path of reasoning and aql, they go through mahiyya or through wujud. Remember, Faiz Kashani was distinguishing between existential approach and non-existential. He says, although maybe one is better, the existential, they are both suffering from this problem, that they are just scientific progress. If it is mahiyya, is hujub zulumaniya, the veils which are matter of darkness. If it is existence, is hujub nuriya, is veil from light, because light can something which in itself has light can become hijab for seeing the greater light. So don't be surprised. If you want to really make progress towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a real sense, that your nafs is moving, not your mind is making progress, you have to get rid of your ego. You have to leave behind the dark house of nafs. He says, اول شرط تحقق سیر الی الله خروج از بیت مظلم نفس و خودی و خودخواهی. The first condition for journeying towards God is to come out of the dark house of the soul and selfishness and egoism. In the same way that, then he makes a good comparison between normal transport and journeying and a spiritual one. For example, you want to travel from your home to another city. If you are still in your home, journey has not started. You have to go out of your home. And then, if you are still in the city, or just a little outside city, but you can hear adhan, the call for prayer, your salat is not qasr. You can see the walls of the last houses. Your salat is not qasr. You have not reached hadd tarakhus. When you reach the point that you don't see the walls, you don't hear, then it is hadd tarakhus. Of course, hadd tarakhus is different from distance. Distance is, for example, 45 kilometers or 22.5 going and 22.5 coming back. But as soon as you reach hadd tarakhus, you pass hadd tarakhus, your salat is broken. You don't need to wait till you reach 45 kilometers. And also a masala that some people don't know is that in the months of Ramadan, when someone is traveling before Zuhr from his watan, they cannot eat when they are at home. They must be fasting till they reach Hadd Tarakhus. Then they can break their fasting. They don't need to reach 45 kilometers, but they have to go beyond Hadd Tarakhus. These are in fiqh, of course, you check with the Risal of your marja. But normally this is very common opinion. So if someone is still at home, has not started the journey, if it is near the home, still problem, not journey has not started. He says, you have to go out of Beit Muslim Nafs. Muslim means dark. And the awsar, the effects of nafs should be hidden. Like you don't see the houses anymore. جدران تعینات, the walls of multiplicities, like the last walls of the city that you see. Azan kasrat. We say, you shouldn't hear the voice of adhan. Here means in a spiritual journey, you don't hear the voice of kathra. So if you want to be musafir ila Allah, you have to leave behind nafs and its effects. So وَمَنْ يَخْرُجْ مِنْ بَيْتِهِ مُهَاجِرًا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ ثُمَّ يُدْرِكْهُ الْمَوْتِ. This hijrah, if it is in its minor sense, means going from Mecca to Medina, for example, from Mecca to Habasha. But in major sense, Hijrat Kubra is to migrate from your nafs. Alhamdulillah, it's interesting that in our discussion, Lubul Lubab, we reached this point today in Liqa'ullah. We reached this point, Alhamdulillah, and now here, Alhamdulillah. I hope we don't just talk about these things, and inshallah we experience them. So, he says, پس از آن که سالک الله به قدم ریاضت و تقوای کامل از بیت خارج شده. After the wayfarer with riyaza, self-disciplining and exercising, and perfect taqwa comes out of Bayt, the house of nafs, and the journey starts. The first manifestation would be uluhiyat, Allah. Then asma and sifat and etc. And he says there are lots of details here that should be left for more detailed books. Then he says it has to be noted that if Allah's kind attention is fixed at this salik, then this salik would develop love, become acquainted with its uns is acquaintance with a kind of love with acquaintance, and then the journey would be not difficult for him, because from this point on would be with love. And when the journey is through love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so you move and your mabda, your origin is Allah, your distance is Allah, your destination is Allah. You are always with God, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you are just busy with Allah's manifestations. Then he says there are also some discussions about the Risala and about Ulul Amr that can be left to another book. At the end, he says we need to clarify something. There's a clarification. Some people have hesitance to interpret these hadiths in this sense. They say these hadiths are said by Ahlul Bayt for ordinary people as well, and ordinary people cannot understand these things. Therefore, they try to interpret these hadiths in a very basic level. But Imam Khomeini says, Ahlul Bayt, if they didn't prioritize these issues of ma'rifah for wayfarers and mystics, at least they have addressed this. And if you read hadith in Al-Kafi, in Tawheed, the book of Tawheed by Sheikh Saduq, you find many beautiful, deep, profound hadiths that refer to these things. But they were also mindful of ordinary people. So maybe what they said had the different levels. Zahir, Batin, and then Batin had Batin, Batin had Batin. So one was Zahir, the outward, the surface, the layers. Then there were deeper layers, esoteric meanings. So we don't deny that people could understand something basic, but we say it was not just that. So no one should think that all these hadiths are only about basic things. How can Ahlul Bayt, who have talked about all the details of eating and drinking and sleeping, what you should do when you take shower, etc., then they haven't talked about these things? They certainly have attention to these things, but they were able to talk in the way that people, based on their capacity, could benefit. Okay, Alhamdulillah, Hadith 37 finished. Inshallah, in the next session, we will have a Hadith about creation of Adam, and the famous Hadith that Allah created Adam in His image. What does in His image mean? It means God's image, Adam's image, what? Inshallah, we'll discuss this in the next session. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.